Frédéric Chopin, alongside Beethoven, Mozart or Bach, was one of the very big dogs when it comes to classical music. Back in the 90s and early 2000s when I had music class, his name would always come up and even some of his music was played. So I got caught off guard a bit when Eternal Sonata was released and was mainly about him. In 2007, Eternal Sonata was released for the Xbox 360, known as Trusty Bell Chopin no Yume in Japan, and then ported for the PlayStation 3 in 2008, or 2009 in Europe, also as Eternal Sonata, known as Trusty Bell Chopin no Yume Reprise in Japan. However, the PlayStation 3 version is a complete version of the game with more content and even new story scenes, but I will get to that in a bit. Which is why the PlayStation 3 version should have been called Eternal Sonata International, just to make the distinction between the PS3 complete version and the Xbox 360 original version. You know, similar to what happened with Star Ocean: The Last Hope. Heck, there is even a short manga with 10 chapters released in 2007 after the Xbox 360 release. The manga is a very short retelling of the game, but with very clear differences and shortcuts. But at least Allegretto has a bit more development than in the game. I am mainly going to talk and show footage from the PlayStation 3 version. So you play as a 14-year-old girl named Polka and she lives in a very small village with her mother. She goes to the city of Retardando and tries to sell flower powder, but nobody cares about it because they have the so-called mineral powder. Even though failing to sell the flower powder is nothing new to her, she is still devastated by it. Never mind the fact that she can use magic and she is feared for it, even though here she was only trying to help. Why can she use magic though? Because she has a terminal illness, so to speak. It's a long story, but to summarize, there are these things called Astra and essentially everybody has one inside them. However, basically those Astras are dormant and do nothing in the vast majority of people. But in Polka, her Astra is very bright and that essentially decides her fate at 14 years of age. Yeah, it's a bit out there, but the game gets a lot more complicated and head-scratching than this further down the road, so yeah, I'm probably have to go into a few spoilers. But continuing the basic story, Polka then meets Chopin himself and he tells her that she is a fabrication of his dream world, essentially making everything in this game his dream. In a way she believes it, but in a different way she doesn't. This gets explained later on. Polka then decides to talk to Count Walls in a country called Forte regarding the mineral powder that is sold in Retardando, and so she and Chopin go on a journey. But before that, let's meet Allegretto and Beat, two boys that are stealing bread in Retardando. They are doing so because they are poor and want to support other children that don't have families and live in hiding. This is one of the few aspects that was explained a bit better in the manga, but whatever. They would actually buy the bread, but since the taxes are insanely high, outside of the mineral powder that is, Allegretto has enough and decides to go to Forte and talk to, well, Count Walls. So he and Beat go on their journey as well. Yes, for a while you will have to play both stories until all four characters finally meet and then continue their journey together, until they get split up again and to reunite later on. Count Walls is a ruthless little shit that knows exactly what he is doing, because the mineral powder, which can heal almost anything quite quickly, is very dangerous when consumed in large doses and it can lead to death. Mineral powder essentially is a dangerous drug that once taken, the user gets instantly addicted to it, and at some point that user goes insane and likely turns into a monster, or even dies from it as stated. But Count Walls wants exactly that, to create his ultimate army and take over, take cover everything if possible. And yeah, outside of this, Count Walls isn't that great of a villain at all. But to Polka and company. She travels around, meets new characters, goes to Barok, which is in conflict with Forte, and ultimately fights Walls himself. Yeah, this was a sped up version of this, because ultimately everything boils down to this. Well, almost. However, everything surrounding this basic story concept is what will keep you either engaged or make you give up on it. Trying to understand what's actually going on beyond the basic story won't be easy at all. So we actually see Chopin in his bed for a while until the end where he dies. And this is actually no surprise, because if you know a bit about him, then you know that he actually died at 39 years of age, which is also why in the game he is 39 years old. From time to time you will see him in his deathbed while 3 characters take care of him. While the game itself doesn't really clarify who they are, the end credits will show you at least who one of these characters is. This is an obvious doctor. It's still unclear who she is, but this one is Chopin's older sister called Ludwika. Yes, based on the real one. There's also a reason why Polka is 14 years old. Chopin himself mentions his sister Emilia a few times, at least in the PS3 version, but almost never in the 360 version, and that's because his little sister died at the age of 14 as well in the game. In a way, Polka reminds him of his little sister. There are 8 chapters total, even though the last chapter is very short, and each chapter is connected to Chopin's real-life events. Well, very loosely, of course. How do I know that? Because each chapter tells you a short story about Chopin's life, and if you then see what happens in the game, you can actually see the connection it has. So it was kind of interesting how the developers tried to create a story about certain events in Chopin's life, which makes the whole thing kind of interesting, but unnecessarily convoluted as well. In the beginning, it's pretty clear what this is all about, but the further you progress, the more confusing it gets. You start to ask yourself what the hell this is all about. You know, outside of the usual defeat bad guy plot. But here is my take, and I will go into spoilers, so if you want to play the game for yourself and be surprised, stop here or skip to this time stamp. If not, then proceed as usual. So this whole world is playing in Chopin's head while in his deathbed. Okay, that's fine and quite interesting. But the question that should be asked is if this is just his dream world he created or not, because he initially thought that he had full control of his dream world, but he actually has not. Polka herself proves it and asks this valid question. So is this a dream world or something like a dream world? Early on we see Polka throwing herself off a cliff, so this won't surprise anyone when she does it again at the end. But here's the thing, she gets reborn again as a 4-year-old and lands on her stepmother's hands. Yes, she is not her real mother. And yes, her stepmother knew this was going to happen. There's also some kind of fortune teller, I guess, that also knows what is going to happen to Polka later on, especially if you assume that this tree shows you how many loops Polka went through before the game even happened. Both of these women knew about this because Polka's life has been in a constant loop, and so she always dies at 14 and gets reborn at 4 again. How this is possible never becomes clear. My assumption is that since Emilia died at 14, Polka is also destined to die at the same age, and since this supposedly is Chopin's dream world, she can't escape because Chopin himself, intentionally or not, created this loop. But why be reborn at 4 years of age specifically? Yeah, no idea. But assuming this is indeed Chopin's dream world, that would mean Chopin has been dreaming about the same thing over and over again ever since he has been in bed sick, maybe even before that, resulting in this loop Polka has to go through, a loop she supposedly is unaware of. Again, for some reason only her stepmother and the fortune teller know about this, and this is kind of weird. Because if not only Polka but the world she lives in is on a loop, then how come those two women are not on a loop as well? Maybe it's because of the question Polka asks Chopin, which would mean Chopin doesn't have full control of his own dream world, or he needs somebody to guide Polka into escaping that loop, and thus those two women are not on a loop, but the rest of the world is. Yet that same world throws constant surprises at him, and that would actually mean that he controls his dream world, but not all that much. So the fact that Polka always dies on a loop might also mean that Chopin himself could never really get over the death of his sister, and thus he is also stuck in this loop himself with no real escape. However, now, since he is in his deathbed and knows his time is up, I assume he decided to stop that loop and save Polka. But if this is his dream world, if he dies in the real world, I assume this would mean his dream world would die as well, right? And who knows, probably that happens in the game as well, if you assume that this scene with that loop stop where Polka comes back and whatever, and the previous scene where the doctor announces Chopin's death in the real world play at the same time instead of one after another as it is shown in the game. Why? Because in this happy scene at the end that plays after his real death, Chopin is still there. But if that were the case, the developers could have played this part after the Polka scene. So maybe either the dream world turns into reality somehow, or the dream world remains a dream forever, a dream that continues to live on, in quotations, with Chopin himself in it despite his death in the real world. I mean, this game will make you think on how this whole world works and what the hell is actually happening, or how it could happen. The developers might have done this on purpose though, making the events in the game, especially towards the end, kind of open for interpretation, even in the PS3 version, because the 360 version was more unclear, which is why the PS3 version added more scenes trying to clear it up a bit, but still leave it open for you to come to your own conclusion. I don't know, maybe I'm trying to justify the events that happen in a logical way, trying to put all the pieces of a puzzle together, but in the end, it's just a shitty ass puzzle. Here's the thing though, I actually found the story to be interesting, even with the second half that will raise quite a lot of questions and probably leave many players confused or maybe make them lose interest. But in a way, that may also be an intriguing part of the game. It just depends on how you look at it. After all is said and done though, sure, still some parts could have been explained better. You will have 11 playable characters in the game. 2 of those, while they play a role in the 360 version and are playable for a bit, in the PlayStation 3 version they will become permanent playable characters after one of the later chapters. And yeah, it's nice that there is more variety in the character selection, but do you really want to level up all these characters? I never once played with March or Salsa, and once I had Falsetto in the group, for the most part I used her because of her speed, together with Allegretto as attackers, and either Viola, Polka, or sometimes even Chopin because of their healing effects. But no reviving effects at all, because they don't exist. You have to use items for that. I just think that less selectable characters would have been better. Like anything, variety is nice, but it loses the focus. But that is also the reason why the character development is often bare bones, because there are too many of them. Of course, outside of Polka and Chopin, because those two develop quite okay. Allegretto had more of a story in the short manga, but even that was a bit generic, and most of the remaining characters fade away into the background and have nothing interesting to tell. There was potential to tell a story with these characters because there are hints of development for them, like viola, jazz, falsetto and so on, but since the game is more focused on polka and Chopin, the rest has little to no time to really develop, even though the developers try, and as a result, many of the scenes with those characters seem almost irrelevant. The amount of characters also takes away from the actual main characters because the developers need to take time from polka or Chopin away to talk about jazz or salsa so they don't fall into deep irrelevancy. Which is why Allegretto, the main character alongside polka and Chopin, seems so generic to the point where his development seemed better in the manga, even though it's pretty obvious that he and polka will be a thing at the end. Also because in the manga, not every character appears. It was quite a shame that the developers had no real focus when it comes to the characters. 3 Crescendo are the developers that created Eternal Sonata and Digimon Redigitize, but mostly co-developed games with others like Danbao Senki with Level 5, Bacon Kaitos with Monolith Soft, the originals, not this remaster, some Tales of games with Bandai Namco, and were responsible for the sound development for 3 Ace games like in Valkyrie Profile, Radiata Stories, and Star Ocean Till the End of Time. And oh yeah, you will immediately recognize those sound effects if you played Star Ocean Till the End of Time, because they are the same ones. Just listen to this. But an obvious good aspect from the game is the music. Chopin's music is very prominent in the game, and even other tracks seem to be heavily inspired by his music, effectively fitting the game's tone. As beautiful as the music in general is though, it's not really memorable. But maybe that was intentional because, at least for me, Chopin's music also had the same effect. Beautiful, but not really memorable. But again, that's just me. Just like the music, the world is awesome. The vivid colors are amazing. I love how the camera repositions itself to show you the full scope of the background's main building, making it look like a photo or something. And the world is beyond charming, even though you can't really revisit places you've already been to. Yes, Eternal Sonata is pretty straightforward, but the whole game has a very tranquil vibe to it. It just makes you relax and just enjoy the overall presentation. I haven't seen any real glitches or anything like that, so the game works perfectly. Again, I played and beat the PlayStation 3 version, but from the time I've spent with the 360 version, I also haven't seen anything. Well, maybe a little bit of slowdown here and there in both versions, but that's actually about it. Man, this is a long video already and literally nobody is watching, but still, I am going to continue and tackle the battle system real quick. So, this is an action RPG, for the most part, you will say why. Meaning you run around, smash a few buttons to attack, heal and whatever and defeat your enemies. So nothing too special about this, but the game has special things in it. So you fight in something like an arena. In this arena you can see 2 different patterns, a dark one and a light one. Your special moves are based on light or darkness, and depending where you are on the field, that's the special attack you can use. For example, if you want to use heal magic with viola, Chopin or polka, you need to be in the light areas because heal magic is, well, light magic. Going into the darker areas won't allow you to use heal magic but rather offensive magic or attacks. This gives you a reason to walk around outside of just approaching enemies and take advantage of the field, which is quite an interesting and fun idea. You won't have this in the beginning, but later on you will be able to use it. With this bar, the more often you attack, the stronger your special attack or magic will be if you decide to use it. It goes up to 32, and I assume those numbers means audio frequency, which would be fitting to this world. You know, since even every single character is named after something that has to do with music. Allegretto, falsetto, polka, salsa, viola, crescendo, etc. Over here is the tactical time, and this is the time you have to think about what you are going to do before you take action. Initially, this will be irrelevant actually, because the time will be infinite, and if you do nothing, this bar doesn't move either. But as you increase the party level, the tactical time will be shorter and essentially non-existent after a while, turning this almost initially turn-based RPG into an action RPG, and yes, this was fun. I've mentioned party level, and this is what I mean. Throughout the game, your party level will increase and thus make the game more difficult. You know, because you will have less and less time to think and react. But at the same time, you will have more options during battle, like being able to use 2 light and 2 dark attacks or spells, and more. So the game takes away time, but tries to compensate that with new ability options and bonuses. And while everything is fun up until now, it comes with a few problems. The arenas you battle in can be often too big to make any real impact in the decisions you make, forcing you to often just run around and do nothing or attack from the distance, which not every character can do. Viola might be the best at this since her arrows do a lot of damage, seemingly the further away she is, but you have to aim those shots as well. Personally, I don't mind any of this. I actually like the aiming aspect for Viola, the fact that sometimes it's better to attack from the distance, especially when you want to do damage, but are not near enough, and many arenas have the right size for it. Meaning the right size for the balance between distant attacks and near attacks. But some are unnecessarily massive, making it not fun to just run around for the most part. For the most part, you cannot change your party levels. The game upgrades that level automatically the further you progress in the story, and so you better adapt to how the game works. I mean, it's not that big of a deal for me, but I can see if somebody criticizes the game for this, and yeah, it would have been nice if there was an option to change it. What is a big deal for me though, is the way you have to defend yourself. So if you want to take as little damage as possible, this icon will appear once an enemy attacks, and that will allow you to defend yourself. I mean, in itself that's fine, because it adds a layer to the action RPG nature of this game, and yeah, it's quite fun to use it and trying to avoid as much damage as possible. And even during the bosses, it's quite fun to use this mechanic, but the problem I have here is that often it's almost impossible to react properly because either the timing feels off for some reason, the camera changes angle effectively, throwing you off, or the boss is so big you don't even see yourself with one of the 3 camera views that you can change at will. I mean, just look at this. I can't see shit. Where the fuck am I? But there is one thing I really dislike about this. It's the way you use items found here. It's not the fact that you have to set your items before entering the battle and can only use the ones you've selected pre-battle. It's rather the fact that if you want to use an item, you have to constantly scroll up and down during the battle, and obviously with the time running. This system could have been implemented better by allowing you to use the items faster or something instead of scrolling up and down like this. That's why ultimately I barely use items at all. Instead, Well, even though I usually do this anyway, I overleveled my party to make sure that I don't use items. Still, sometimes I had no other choice, I will be honest. But finally, let's talk about the 360 version for a bit. Now, as mentioned, the PlayStation 3 version is essentially the complete version of this game. Crescendo and Sonata are only fully playable characters in the PlayStation 3 version. Scenes were added or slightly changed. You can select French subtitles, I think because either the game was beloved in France or because Chopin lived many years in France and also died there. The PlayStation 3 version overall is harder because even the standard difficulty ramped up and you get less EXP compared to the 360 version. They added 2 new areas to the game, costumes for polka, allegretto and beat, and an encore mode, which essentially is the hard difficulty in the game, which is only unlockable after you've beaten the game once and go through it once again. Here's an example of added or changed scenes. Notice the title screen, which is obviously different, and when I start the game on both at the same time. And now notice this scene with allegretto and beat in the first chapter. There is a line that was cut for the PlayStation 3, mainly because it was unnecessary actually. At least, I think. Examples like these are in the whole game, and if you have both versions, it might be interesting seeing what was changed. I have both versions, but haven't beaten the 360 version yet. It might happen someday. The PS3 version does not have trophies, the 360 version has achievements, so if you care that much about that, then the 360 version might be for you. Ultimately though, Eternal Sonata is a very charming and chill game that has quite nice ideas but tries to be too smart for its own good with the story with Chopin and lacks real focus with the characters. The battle system could have also been implemented a bit better, but still I would say that this is an JRPG that you need to play for sure.